Okay, before we get too far into it, first I'm going to take a drink. No, it is not beer because I am out of beer and I cannot afford it, especially after this last week. It's just discounted store brand Dr. Pepper knockoff. I can't even get the discounted Slurm anymore because that seems to be out of stock. Now, note for the channel, first off, I do not know when I'm going to be posting the next actual training videos that I do or gear reviews because of what I've been dealing with the past couple weeks here. My patrons over at Patreon knew about this right away. I've kept this under wraps otherwise until everything was said and done. But 2 weeks ago, I got word that my father had died. Now, the situation behind it is, I want to mention this because this is going on across the country. My father had a massive infection in one of his limbs, something that had occurred in the past and had been treated with antibiotics. When members of my family had found out, they took him to the emergency room. When he was at the emergency room, the staff told him, "Oh no, you're not here because of the infection in that limb. You're here because you're infected with a certain virus that's going around the country." He was immediately put into isolation and not allowed to talk to the family members that had brought him to the ER. Well, the end result was he died. And details, I'm not going to give too many about what happened while he was in isolation, but I will be putting a link to a story or a news report from David Knight in the description. I recommend all of you go and look at some of these news stories I'm going to be linking in the description here. Watch the videos, read the articles. What happened to my father is what's in this news story exactly, okay? I'm not going to go into further on that because if I do, YouTube will strike the channel with, not even a heartbeat will pass before they would do it. So go check out that story. And if you're not aware of who David Knight is, he's a libertarian alternative news reporter. He is extremely good. He used to be part of InfoWars. He was one of them at InfoWars that was questioning Donald Trump, and he was sacrificed by High Priest Alex Jones to the Trump cult. He still holds Trump's feet to the fire along with other politicians. He's not afraid to point things out and give you the facts. So go check out that. Now, while I've been away, we had the Rittenhouse verdict, which is the verdict I had been praying for and hoping for. Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all charges, and the judge dismissed the firearms charge because even that was overreach by the prosecution. And when they got cornered on that, they had to admit it. The judge threw it out. Now, the media is saying that Rittenhouse was acquitted. No, he was found innocent. He was found not guilty. My understanding is acquitted means that it was a hung jury. I'm not a legal expert. I only had some basic law stuff when I went to college, just kind of a familiarization thing when I got my degrees. And my understanding is acquitted means one or more of the juries thought differently than the rest of the jury. That's not what happened. all jurors finally agreed that he was not guilty. It had been a hung jury for most of last week because reportedly 2 of the jurors were deathly afraid of what would happen if they declared Rittenhouse innocent. And might as well start saying that, people. He was found not guilty. He was innocent. Okay? So 2 juries were afraid that their families and them would be targeted and that Kenosha would burn. So they went through, they rewatched video evidence to include video evidence that the prosecution did not even give the defense or let them know existed. They withheld evidence. The end result was the jurors finally all agreed last Friday that Kyle Rittenhouse was not guilty, that they agreed he acted in self-defense. Any other verdict than that would have given the media wiggle room where they could have said that Rittenhouse was guilty, but he was let off because of systemic racism, which they're going around and saying that now anyway. They're still playing the whole race card up the wazoo. Most major news outlets still refuse to admit that the 3 people that Rittenhouse shot, that he defended himself against, are also white. They're still making it sound like they were black. They're also covering up the criminal histories of all 3 of the people that were shot, and they're covering up the criminal history of Jump Kick Man. Now, some other things that came out with the trial. It really looked to me like the prosecution knew they could not win, so they were deliberately trying to throw the trial, trying to get a mistrial, because that would allow at least a propaganda victory for the left. It was pretty obvious that this prosecutor, Binger, has Antifa leanings and BLM leanings. He kind of wore it like a badge, is what it seemed to me. It really exuded from his very being. You could see that, you could feel it. And there had been reports of him being an Antifa supporter while the riots were going on and Rittenhouse was originally charged. So it seemed like the prosecution was trying to get a mistrial. And it also seemed like the defense was trying to throw the case also. But the prosecution so bungled the whole case that the prosecution basically ended up proving the defense's case for them. End result, Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty, and this is an extremely important victory for us, whether you want to accept it or realize it or not. Is it a misjustice that he was charged in the first place? Of fucking course it was. That was a miscarriage of justice, him being brought up on charges and put through this whole goddamn thing. But you know what? The American Patriot won in the end. Because what was really on trial here in Kenosha is the right to self-defense. If they would have said and proven to the jury that self-defense is murder, I guarantee you, you would have seen laws get pulled out of folders across the country in every state legislature and at the federal level, going through declaring self-defense is illegal, just like it is in Australia and in England and your other European countries, where if you defend yourself against someone attacking you, you go to jail. But luckily, the jury finally nutted up, grabbed themselves by the sack, and showed that people have a right to self-defense in this country. Now, hopefully, and I have no doubt this is going on, Rittenhouse and his family is preparing lawsuits against all of the major media outlets, to include Fox News. Don't let them slide by. They were defaming and slandering him also. Fox News or Fox News is not on our side, people. Don't get confused by that propaganda. They're not patriot. They're controlled patriot propaganda. That's all they are. Hopefully, they have lawsuits ready to go against all of those media outlets, along with individual reporters. And hopefully, there's also certain politicians that are going to be getting served papers for lawsuits for defamation also, because of what they said in the media, in press conferences. I highly doubt the case would be successful going against Joe Biden, because that guy is so far fucking gone with dementia, with Alzheimer's, he can't even frickin' put his clothes on. He doesn't even know how to wipe his own ass. And yes, that kind of came out because of a little incident that happened at the Vatican. Someone was monitoring a radio or something, or social media posting, where they let it slip that Biden had a little bathroom accident and that his team was trying to take care of it, meaning they were changing his fucking diaper. So I don't think any lawsuit against that senile old bastard will go anywhere, because they'll outright say dementia, he doesn't know what he's saying, and he'll get off. But certain other politicians, hopefully they'll be brought up on charges, or I should say, they'll be served papers for defamation, and they'll start dropping like fucking dominoes. Now, there is a meme out there that from the Babylon Bee, which I really major thumbs up on this one, where Nick Sandmann and Kyle Rittenhouse have agreed to shared custody rights of CNN. They'll just swap them back and forth between the two of them. Now, what happened after the verdict? There were protests that did occur in New York, Chicago. Kenosha has been pretty low, and Portland are the ones that I've been hearing. Portland apparently has been the worst so far, the most violent, which isn't a surprise, because that is a communist stronghold in this country. New York's been number 2 on that for the next worst, from what I've heard, but for them it's mostly civil disobedience stuff, which they do have the right for that under the First Amendment and the Constitution. You do have a right to protest as long as it does not become violent and people get injured. Reportedly, Portland, they've gone over that line. I haven't heard of that happening in New York. It's still civil disobedience. Same with Chicago. Kenosha has been pretty much the same thing also. It still can be classified as civil disobedience. They're not in the riot stages, as from what I've heard. Now, the media has lost their shit over the Rittenhouse not guilty verdict. Up yours, YouTube. It was proven in court now. So you can't say it's disinformation to say that he acted in self-defense. The jury of his peers, the people of Kenosha, said he acted in self-defense. The media is losing their shit. They're still branding him a white supremacist, and they've, tripled the activity, if not quadrupled it. The whole defamation of Rittenhouse's character, the whole situation, the very right of self-defense. You actually have politicians now, along with activists and media people, saying that even though the jury said he had a right to self-defense, we need to look at self-defense in this country, and it still needs to be made illegal. We'll see how far that goes. I don't think it'll get very far, But as we all know, the enemy doesn't give a flying rat's ass what the hell we believe. Which brings us up to yesterday, the day that I returned home, or I should say back to home base from home. Those of you that are wondering where I'm originally from, well, if you watched the live streams with Kaz, I let it slip a few times there. Now, I was able to attend John the Prepared Mind's live stream last night, his Sunday night zoo. For those of you looking for manuals, tactics and that type of stuff, you're wondering what to look into, I was posting links in his chat during his live stream to manuals. Manuals that I posted, and maybe I'll put these in the description also, links to them. I posted some manuals on OP4 tactics, opposing force tactics, infantry manuals, newer ones, and also common task manuals. Maybe I'll toss in a few others in the description also. Seriously, look underneath the video. You're going to see a few sentences, and then it's going to say show more. Click on show more, and that will open that all up, and it will pull up all the links. You're going to see a link in there to the BitChute channel. You'll see a link in there to the Patreon channel, and you will see links to the different articles that I'm mentioning. And yeah, I might as well. I'll throw in the links for some manuals that I recommend. If possible, try to get the paper ones. If you can't get a copy of a paper one online, find a way to get one printed or a batch of them printed for your people. Now, during the live stream, as soon as I logged in, Uman asked me if I had heard anything about 3 explosions being reported in Kenosha by some of our syndicate people who were boots on the ground at the time. I still have heard nothing on any explosions in Kenosha. I sent out some text messages to some people I know that are up in the general area up around there, if they heard anything, and I've gotten no replies back yet. But another thing that happened is people were bringing up about a red SUV that plowed through a crowd at a Christmas parade. Now, here's what I got on this one. Reportedly, originally they were looking for 3 suspects were reported in a vehicle, but video footage and people that were literally right next to the SUV as it drove past reported there was only 1 suspect. The suspect was identified by the Waukesha Police Department as Darrell Edward Brooks Jr., 39-year-old black male with an extremely lengthy criminal history. Now, early reports came out that this person was fleeing a knife fight or some other crime or incident that happened outside of the Christmas parade area, and that he was fleeing, and that's why he just happened to drive into the crowd. Now, some background on, and that has not been confirmed, okay? None of that has been confirmed about him fleeing, but there is going to be a news conference later today by the chief of police in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and we'll see what the latest news is at that time. But at the current moment, okay? Some background on Darrell Edward Brooks Jr. He is a registered sex offender who admitted in a video that he pimps out little children. He is a career criminal who was released back onto the streets on a $1,000 bail despite being charged with bail jumping and facing a plethora of violent felonies and misdemeanors just over 2 weeks ago, and that is from Wisconsin court records. I will link to some articles on this stuff from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Links will be in the description. Now, Mr. Brooks is a wannabe rapper who apparently is known in the Minneapolis area. I don't have his name. That didn't print out here on my printouts for some reason. His social media and his songs are filled, just overwhelmingly pro-Marxist, pro-BLM propaganda and rhetoric and talking points and violent anti-white stuff. That's all we're going to say, okay? Now, Andy No, if you remember him from up in the Portland area, he tracks Antifa. He's one of them who was able to get into Brooks's social media before the social media companies scrubbed it last night. Once the name came out, the social media companies started taking down his profiles and everything everywhere. But luckily, some alternative media were able to get in there and get screenshots. Andy No reported that one of Darrell Brooks Jr.'s posts on social media was how to get away with running over people on the street. So that kind of brings into question what really happened. Yeah. See if there's any other notes I have on this story, on this shitbag. Someone wrote in here from reading stuff from his Twitter. I don't know how you read some of these posts as anything other than raw, unfiltered, anti-white hatred. This post clearly refers to white people as the enemy. He also has a lot, or had a lot, of anti-police postings in there too. He apparently had a lot of stuff in his songs about making white people slaves, about hunting them, and just some pretty violent shit. So we can't say for certain yet that what happened in Waukesha was a BLM terrorist attack, but the signs are there. We'll find out at the press conference. I'm not overly trusting of the Waukesha Police Department or the city government because Paul Joseph Watson found out, doing some digging on the police chief and mayor and others in that city, they are very pro-BLM. The police chief of the Waukesha Police Department in 2020, while the riots were going on in Kenosha, which is 55 miles away from Waukesha, he held a rally for BLM in Waukesha, and he made the officers attend the rally, get down on their knees, and kiss the feet of members of BLM. So I'm not overly trusting that this police chief will find the truth as to what happened. He may end up whitewashing it or blackwashing it, depending on whatever color you want to pick, okay? Since whitewashing could be considered racist now. Fucking language police. Now, after the stuff came out about Darrell Brooks Jr., he was identified and people started digging into his criminal records, found out that he's out on bail for multiple felonies and misdemeanors and had been let out on a $1,000 bail less than 2 weeks ago. You have a left-wing social justice activist by the name of Mark Feinberg. Link to the article that I'm getting this information from will be in the description. Ooh, boy. Let's see if I can find. And yes, I have some of the stuff here. Mr. Feinberg posted on, I'm guessing it's Twitter, perhaps it was self-defense from the crowds. Don't two sides this thing. This is after people pointed out that this occurred at a Christmas parade. Someone responded back, it was a Christmas parade, you nitwit. And Feinberg responded with, poor white people. And yes, Mr. Feinberg is white. Now, someone of Middle Eastern descent posted just terrible, multiple dead after... The stuff's kind of broken up on here. Some of it printed, some of it didn't. Multiple dead after driver plows SUV into Christmas parade in Wisconsin. Mr. Feinberg responded with, more or less terrible than 402 plus years of systemic Holocaust against black people, which killed millions. Now, Mr. Feinberg did not get off scot-free. People in social media started attacking his vile comments because he's trying to link that what the guy in Wisconsin did is no different than what Rittenhouse did in Kenosha. No. The jury found Rittenhouse not guilty and declared it self-defense. This guy plowing his vehicle into a crowd of little kids, and that's who most of the injured are, and they're not talking about that in most of the news reports. Most of the 40-plus injured are little kids, 13 and under, that were part of a Christmas parade. These little kids were not attacking people. They were not spitting on his car. They were not throwing bricks. They were not burning buildings. They were not shooting at him as he was plowing through them. And so far we have 5 dead, others that are expected to die, also at least 40 injured. Yeah. But Mr. Feinberg, after he got his tit in the ringer, if you want to say that, he started deleting his posts, but people had already gotten screenshots, and he turned it into anti-Semitism. And I'll read you his little posting here. This is what he pivoted to towards the end, apparently. Quite interesting to see the amount of anti-Semitism anger out there. The points being made regarding the tragedy in Wisconsin is there is a double standard of outrage. Until we can admit this as a nation, we won't and can't move forward. So Mr. Feinberg, who was posting very vile postings about little children being run down by a guy who is a registered sex offender who admitted he pimps little kids. Yes. This sack of shit is trying to lionize a sack of crap with a huge criminal history, a sex offender, convicted sex offender, who in his own social media postings admits he pimps out little children. Mr. Feinberg is trying to saint him, trying to turn him into a hero. Just like Littlefinger tried to do with Rosenbaum, Huber, and Roskreutz in Kenosha. For those of you that missed that, out on the steps and the streets in front of the courthouse, as Littlefinger was doing that in the courtroom. You had leftists outside with signs calling Rosenbaum a convicted sex offender, a convicted pedophile who brutally raped. That's the description that was released by his local police department. Brutally raped 6 boys between the ages of 9 and 11. And Huber, convicted felon on domestic violence and drug charges. And do you realize how bad a person has to be to get felony domestic violence? He's another felon also, along with Rosecrans. And then Rosenkreutz, Mr. Spicy Bicep, is also a felon for robbery and domestic abuse. All 3 of those shitbags. There were signs in front of the courtroom saying that they were saints and they were heroes to the community. Now let's go back to Mr. Jump Kick Man. He was identified during the trial because he had come forward to the prosecution, admitted that was him on camera kicking Rittenhouse in the face, and he was willing to testify against Rittenhouse in return for getting some charges dropped against him. Jump Kick Man also has a very lengthy criminal history of domestic violence, of robbery, and drug charges. And he was out on bail even while the Rittenhouse trial was going on. He was also out on bail during the Kenosha riots. He was out on bail for more charges of domestic abuse. Is anyone else noticing a commonality on these people the left is choosing to lionize? To say that they're the paragons, the ones that the rest of us should be crying over and worshiping? Jacob Blake, the whole person that was the reason for the Kenosha riots, well, he had been a sex offender, was trying to kidnap his ex-girlfriend's kids away from her. He pulled a knife on the police and got his ass shot over it, and that resulted in riots. St. George Floyd up in Minneapolis, a guy with also an extremely lengthy criminal history. You know, you can go down the list of all the saints from last year's riots. The ones that the people were protesting things happening to them. Either being arrested, shot, killed, whatever it turned out to be. Every last one of them had a fucking rap sheet a mile long. With things like drug charges being in there, which I can understand, you know, the people that argue they shouldn't be. Okay, I can kind of understand that, okay? But they also had charges of domestic violence. I thought leftists were against violence against women. Charges of sexual assault against children. I thought you believed in protecting kids, but then when you look at who you elect to Congress, and to the White House, you obviously don't. These are violent shitbags. But you want to pin everything on them and then start telling us that we're the despicable ones. Because we followed the laws that you assholes write up. You know what's going to happen someday? You keep pushing this stuff, it's going to get to a point where we're going to say, you know what? Fuck you and fuck your laws. We're going to do our own thing. And if you like it, you don't like it, go fuck yourself. And then not long after that will be when those shots get fired. And then this type of stuff is going to be seriously needed, won't it? I've been harping on this for a while, as has everyone else. Buy food. Buy shelf-stable items. Stack it to the rafters. Fill your closets. Filled every available space in your home with food. Do it. Oh, and I'll mention this. Watch out for rodents. The rodent population in my area has fucking skyrocketed this year. My field mice are fucking everywhere. I got them in my house, in my outbuildings. They're everywhere outside when you're walking around in the grass. The population fucking skyrocketed this year. And for the first time ever, I'm having problems with mice starting to eat some of the food preps that I have that are waiting to get boxed up into totes for use in caches. So I have to put out even more bait blocks, more mouse traps. So keep watch of that inside your homes. If you start seeing any mouse activity, yeah, double, triple what you already have out to take care of them. And remember, take into account any pets you have. You don't want them getting poisoned by eating a mouse that's dying from or had died from eating a bait block. So be aware of that. Be careful where you put your bait and that type of stuff, where you put your live traps, your kill traps, and whatever else that you use. I'm not a big fan of the glue boards because those have a tendency to get full of dust and then they don't work. I prefer the kill traps. And then go through. Normally I used to go through every 2-3 days, check my traps, check the bait, replace as needed. This year I have to check once every day, if not twice every day, because the population is just so large, it's fucking ridiculous. In 1 week, I've already caught as many mice in 1 week as I normally catch in an entire winter. And it's still going. I'm catching mice on traps that don't even have bait on them. You know, there's so fucking many. They're going after everything. They're eating the goddamn insulation off my pipes. They're so fucking desperate. There's that many. There's just a huge population of rodents this year. So be aware of that for your food preps. Check them, double check them. Make sure that the rodents are not getting into them. How you protect against rodents: 1, get the stuff up off the floor. Get the traps down there. Get your bait out in areas that are nearby where you suspect a colony may be at, because they'll come out, they'll eat that, go back into the colony and die. Protect some of your stuff. Put it inside containers, especially metal containers. If they figured out what's inside the plastic ones and are eating through those, we'll start putting the stuff in metal containers like galvanized trash cans. That's something that mice cannot get into. Just make sure that the lid is on there nice and tight so that the mouse can't get up under the lid. So there you go. We're at about almost 40 minutes and I'm going to cut it off here. I'll try to get some videos knocked out sometime in the next week or two, but it might turn out to that it'll be some reposts and that stuff this week. And over at BitChute, if you're not a subscriber over there, I've been uploading some movies and training videos I've gotten from YouTube and other places. You know, trying to upload them there because it's good to know stuff, especially on the opposing force, the Op 4, and the tactics that they employ. There will be links to manuals in the description that I recommend you get. You read them, you study them, you remember them. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.